Around 10,000 BCE, the last ice age finally started to chill out. Glaciers retreated, the climate warmed up, and humans suddenly found themselves living in a world that wasn't constantly trying to freeze them to death. And with that change came something historians dramatically call the Neolithic Revolution. The name means New Stone Age, which sounds exciting, like humans invented some incredible new stone technology, but honestly, the new part mostly refers to polished stone tools, like shinier axes. That's nice, but it's not exactly the kind of thing that changes the course of human history. The real revolution had nothing to do with fancy rocks. It had to do with food. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans survived as hunter-gatherers. That meant every meal required effort. If you wanted dinner, you had to go out and find it. Maybe you picked berries, maybe you chased a deer, maybe the deer chased you. Either way, it was a lot of work. But around 10,000 BCE, humans had a brilliant realization. Instead of chasing food, what if we grew it ourselves? And just like that, people began planting crops and domesticating animals. Grains and vegetables could now be grown in predictable places, and animals like goats, pigs, sheep, and cattle could be raised instead of hunted. Suddenly, food didn't depend entirely on luck. You had crops for bread and porridge. You had animals for meat, milk, hides, and wool. Also, large animals could even haul things around, like the world's first pickup trucks. Historians call this shift the agricultural revolution because it completely changed the relationship between humans and nature. Instead of wandering around hoping nature would provide, humans started controlling their environment. And once you can reliably grow food, something amazing happens. You can finally stop wandering around all the time. What's really interesting is that agriculture didn't start in just one place. It seems to have developed independently in several regions between about 9,000 and 7,000 BCE. Different parts of the world grew different crops. In the Near East, people cultivated wheat, barley, and lentils. In South and East Asia, it was rice and millet. In West Africa, millet and yams. And in the Americas, people domesticated beans, potatoes, and maize, better known as corn. In the Near East, especially, the environment was perfect for early farming. The upland regions around the Fertile Crescent, modern-day Iraq and southern Turkey, received enough rainfall to grow crops naturally. Even better, wild versions of wheat and barley already grew there. And conveniently, several animals that would later become livestock, goats, sheep, pigs, and cattle were already roaming around nearby. It was basically the prehistoric equivalent of moving into a neighborhood where the grocery store, the hardware store, and the pizza place are all within walking distance. Once people started farming regularly, they didn't need to keep wandering anymore, and that led to something new in human history: permanent settlements. One of the earliest known farming communities was Jericho, located near the Dead Sea. By around 8,000 BCE, people were already living there, and by 7,000 BCE, it had grown into a settlement covering several acres. It even had a massive stone wall surrounding it. This means humans had already invented two very important things: cities and city walls to keep other people out. Another famous Neolithic settlement was Çatalhöyük in modern-day Turkey. This place was huge for its time, about 32 acres, with a population that may have reached around 6,000 people. But the design of the city was interesting. The houses were packed so tightly together that there were almost no streets. Instead of walking between buildings, people walked across the rooftops. To get into your house, you literally climbed into the roof and climbed down through a hole. So yes, the entire town basically functioned like one giant prehistoric apartment complex with skylight entrances. Archaeologists have found evidence that the people of Çatalhöyük grew a few variety of crops, fruit, nuts, and several types of wheat. They stored their food in rooms inside their houses, and they raised domesticated animals like cattle for meat, milk, and hides. And because farming could produce surplus food, not everyone had to spend all day gathering dinner anymore. Some people became artisans, making tools, weapons, jewelry, and other goods that could be traded with neighboring communities. This was the beginning of something extremely important in human history, which was job specialization and emerging and defining culture. Instead of everyone doing the same survival task, people could focus on different skills. In other words, civilization was starting to get organized. Religion also became increasingly important in Neolithic communities. At Çatalhöyük, archaeologists discovered shrines decorated with images of gods and goddesses, along with numerous small female statues. These statues often had exaggerated features like large hips and breasts, which scholars believe symbolized fertility and abundance. Many historians think these figures represented an Earth Mother, a symbolic connection between human fertility and the fertility of the land itself. Because if your entire society depends on crops growing successfully every year, you're probably going to spend a lot of time praying that the harvest works out. The shift to agriculture changed nearly everything about human life. Once people settled in villages, they built permanent houses, storage buildings, and workshops. Communities began accumulating goods and trading with other settlements. New technologies appeared. Clay was shaped into pottery and fired to create durable containers for cooking and storing grain. Stone tools were refined into sharper blades for sickles and farming tools. Obsidian, a volcanic glass, was used to make incredibly sharp cutting edges. People also began weaving fibers from plants like flax into thread and cloth. In other words, humans were inventing the basic tools of everyday life. The Neolithic shift also began to shape social roles in new ways. Men increasingly took responsibility for field work and herding animals, which kept them away from home for long periods. Women often remained closer to the household, raising children and performing labor-intensive tasks like weaving cloth, preparing food, and producing dairy products like cheese. Over time, many societies began to value the work done outside the home more than the work done inside it. As a result, men gradually came to hold more political and social power, a pattern that would persist in many societies for thousands of years. The patterns established during the Neolithic age shaped much of human history. Permanent homes, domesticated animals, agriculture, specialized jobs, trade networks. All of these things became the foundation of civilization. Even today, despite all our technology, satellites, and smartphones, human survival still ultimately depends on something Neolithic farmers figured out thousands of years ago: growing and storing food. By around 4000 BCE, new technologies began transforming these farming societies even further. People discovered that certain rocks contained certain metals, and when heated, those materials could be melted and poured into molds. At first, the metal used was copper, but soon people discovered something even better. If you mix copper with tin, you get bronze, which is harder and more durable. This innovation was so important that historians call this period from about 3000 to 1200 BCE the Bronze Age. At roughly the same time, another invention appeared that would permanently change human civilization: writing. Because once humans started recording information, laws, trade records, stories, history, societies became far more complex. Villages grew into cities. Cities developed armies, and large populations began gathering in fertile river valleys like those of Southwest Asia and Egypt. And just like that, humanity was stepping out of the prehistoric world and into the first great civilizations.